right, we'll go ahead and get started with some housekeeping things. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just for those who are just coming on, just please make sure, if you can just make sure that you keep your settings on mute for the duration of the webinar, that would be great. We really appreciate that so that everyone can hear and we don't get feedback and crosstalk and all that good stuff. If you do have questions as we're going along, please do pop them into the chat box. If you're on a laptop computer or a desktop computer, the chat function is at the bottom of your screen. You can kind of hover over the bottom and you'll see that if you're not familiar with it. And if you are on like a cell phone or a tablet, you might have like a couple, 3 dots or something that you have to press to get access to that chat box. But please do feel free to throw any and all questions into the chat box. My colleague Larry Francer, who's the Associate Director at Landmark Society, he's here with Chris and I tonight, who will be presenting. And Larry will be moderating the chat box for us. So if there's anything that we need to stop and answer, we'll do that. And then, of course, at the end, we'll leave plenty of time to answer any questions that might not have gotten addressed while we were talking. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I want to first acknowledge our generous sponsor who's made this webinar possible, Esther Krakauer, who's a realtor with Hunt Real Estate. We really appreciate her support, and we'll talk a little bit later at the end actually about another exciting component of this program that our sponsor support is allowing us to do. So introductions. My name's Caitlin Mivas. I'm the Director of Preservation at the Landmark Society. I also live in the Park Avenue neighborhood of the city of Rochester. I own a historic home and recently completed a several-year labor of love to get a historic district created in our neighborhood so that we could use the state tax credits. So I'm really excited about that and really excited to be talking about them.
I'm Chris Brandt. I'm a project architect at Barrow Architecture. It's been Rochester's local specialty firm in historic preservation since 1976. I live in a 1928 home up in the town of Irondequoit that is individually listed on the National Register. And I've successfully completed 3 of the homeowner historic tax credit applications. So sort of here to share the wealth and try to evangelize the rest of you to try to pursue tax credits for your own historic homes.
And hopefully by the end of this, you'll all be convinced that this is something that you can run with and you're excited to do. So I always like to start presentations by giving folks the lay of the land, because I know my brain needs context for what we're talking about. So I provide that context for other people. We're going to be talking today about a New York City tax credit program. So it is a state-run program. It's run by a state, which you will see identified here on the left-hand column under the government sector. So in the world of preservation, we typically deal with the government sector on one side and the nonprofit sector on the other. So Landmark Society, we're a local, regional, nonprofit preservation advocacy organization. But we also work with colleagues at the statewide level. We have our colleagues at the Preservation League of New York State who really lead the charge on advocating with the state legislature for the historic tax. And then at the national level, we have the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So on your government level, the entity that we're really going to be most relevant today is the agency, which is the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So it's the same agency that manages the state parks, but they have this division for historic preservation that manages preservation-related programs like the National Register of Historic Places and the tax credit program that we're going to be talking about. So the agency, the folks who manage these preservation programs, every state has what's called a State Historic Preservation Office, which those of us in the field abbreviate as SHPO. So those are the folks that we're talking about today. So it's the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, but Chris and I may refer to it as the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO for short. So if you hear us slipping into jargon like that, we're not talking about a boat. We are talking about a state agency. And we will do our best not to slip into preservation jargon because it can get very confusing. So the state agency, the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, manages this tax credit program that we're going to be talking about. The National Park Service administers at the federal level the National Register of Historic Places. But at the state level, the State Preservation Office carries out that program. So people, if you choose to use homeowner tax credits, the people you'll be interacting with are the friendly staff at the State Historic Preservation Office, and they are based in Albany. And staff specifically who work with the counties in our region here in Western New York, specifically the counties that we at the Landmark Society officially that are officially in our service area. The two staff people at the state are Christina Vagvolgi and Frances Stern. Now is a good time if you want to screenshot this page or take a picture with your cell phone. These are good people to have. Their contact info is also on the state's website, which I've got at the bottom here. But these are the folks you'll be working with if you complete a homeowner's tax credit application. And they are state employees, and they are, so, don't be bashful. They work for us, right? So don't be bashful about reaching out to them if you have questions regarding now, did my screen unshare just now?
It did, yes.
Okay, I was like, what's happening? Anyway, okay, are we good now?
Yeah.
Okay. Do not be bashful about reaching out to them if you have any questions. Christina and Frances are both really great to work with, really helpful, really knowledgeable, and they're here to help guide you through the process. So again, this is the agency, the State Historic Preservation Office, that manages the Homeowners Tax Credit Program, which we are going to be talking about tonight. So some basic intro information about the tax credit program. It is a credit, not a deduction. So a credit is just money. It reduces the amount of money that you owe the government, bottom line. A deduction reduces your taxable income. So a credit is better than a deduction. So yay, we have that. And it is a credit off of your personal New York State income tax. The credit is worth 20% of qualified rehabilitation expenses, or QREs, and Chris will talk about what QREs are and what kind of rehab expenses qualify. A really important point, the program is not retroactive. So if you say live in a historic district and you already did a bunch of work on your house that would have qualified, but you didn't apply for tax credits, unfortunately, you can't go back and get credits for work that you've already done. The state really has to approve the work before you do it, and that's why there's an application process. And the application process, you'll see, is actually pretty simple. And then you claim the credit after you complete the project and you file your income tax returns the following year. So it's a real simple overview. Don't worry, we'll go into more detail. Just to give you a sense of the legislative background, this program hasn't been around for that long. It really took off in the last 10 years, and it's really intended as a program to help incentivize folks to invest in revitalizing their neighborhoods and invest in their historic homes. So it's a program that we've had to a few times work with our colleagues at the Preservation League of New York State to really advocate for this program to be renewed, because each time it's renewed by the state legislature, it does come with a sunset date. So, right now it's set to sunset in 2024. I can't believe that's a year that we're talking about. I tell you that because it's really important. The more people who use this program, the more valuable it shows our state legislators that the program is. And, it has lots of ripple effects in terms of the local economy. So it's a really important program, and we want as many people to be using it as possible so that we can really have a lot of strength when we're advocating for it at the state level. Okay, so Chris is going to talk about the workflow as to how to structure your homeowner tax credit project, how the application works, and we'll kind of just break it down one step at a time.
Okay, so yes, we'll go sort of step by step here. So a little bit of this sort of first slide is a few things that Caitlin had already previously touched on. But so qualification requirements for this program. First things first, it would be it's for a owner-occupied home. So this is not for a rental or income-producing property. There is a separate tax credit program for that is far more involved and complicated than this specific program, although it does have a higher percentage return, but there needs to be a far greater sum of investment to qualify for that. So we're not going to be touching on the commercial tax credit. This is solely the New York State homeowner tax credit. The home needs to be either a contributing structure to a National Register of Historic District, so that's kind of like Caitlin's house, or she's in a larger district, the Park Avenue Historic District in the city of Rochester, or needs to be an individually listed property. So that would be sort of like my house, and there are many farms and other individual homes across Monroe County that are that type of listing on the National Register. And then the other sort of big, broad qualifying piece, so you need to own a property that's either contributing or individually listed, and you need to be located within an income qualifying census tract. And we'll go over how you can pretty easily view that in an online system provided by the New York State SHPO. And then for the homeowner tax credit, there needs to be a minimum of $5,000 expended on repairs, rehabilitation, and improvements in order to qualify. And of that project sum, whether it's $5,000, $15,000, $20,000, 5% of that project costs that you would be submitting needs to be dedicated to exterior work on your home. All of the work, as Caitlin said before, needs to be approved by SHPO before it begins, and it's not a retroactive credit, so you can't ask for credits for work that's already been completed. And then there's a 2-year recapture period. So this is sort of intended to avoid sort of flipping of homes, so that there's a sort of 2-year period in which if you were to move out within that 2 years of having done the work and received the credit, you would have to return the credit to the state. And then we compiled this quick little list just to give you a sense of all the different historic districts throughout the city of Rochester, as well as Monroe County. There are a number of districts throughout the city. These are all districts that are primarily residential. So there are some National Register districts in the city that are primarily commercial buildings, and those are not listed here. So these are all, there's I think a total of like 15 or 16 districts currently listed on the National Register in the city of Rochester. And there's a few that for the Gregory tract that's currently just beginning the process of writing the National Register nomination, and then a few others that are potentials or are beginning to garner interest from their respective neighborhoods and potentially pursuing National Register listing in order to get access to these tax credits.
And I should say, if you live in the city and you don't see your neighborhood, on this list, definitely feel free to reach out to me, to any staff member at Landmark Society, and we can see. We have been working with the city of Rochester for last several years to inventory historic resources, buildings in the city, and identify potential districts. So your neighborhood may already be identified as a potential district. So if you want to inquire about that, definitely reach out to us.
Yeah, there's, we'll see them in one of our graphics, but sort of roughly, there's probably almost as many potential or eligible districts in the city as there are districts that are currently listed. So there are a lot of areas in the city that could begin to pursue that. Then there's a handful of districts throughout Monroe County. There's a lot less than we would like to see, I think, for Caitlin and I being preservationists, but these are the few. And when you get out into the county, there are some areas in the county that have National Register districts that do not qualify for the tax credit program because they are in census tracts that have median household incomes that exceed the requirements for the New York State tax credit program. And then there are a series of districts throughout the sort of 9-county region that Atlantic Study serves, primarily focused on various historic villages in and throughout the greater Rochester region. Okay, so am I in a National Register district and am I in a qualifying census tract? How do I find out? So over the last, I'm trying to think now, it's maybe been 5 or 6 years, the New York State SHPO has run this website, the Cultural Resource Information System, or CRIS. And that's the sort of main website link there, chris.parks.ny.gov. And it brings you into this interface where you can navigate in a system very similar to Google Maps or MapQuest, but in this case, there's a series of different types of information overlaid onto the maps once you zoom in. So this is a zoomed in view in and around Kodak Park. And when you're navigating through this, there are a series of layers of information that you can turn on and off, and there's a key that helps you understand what is sort of being shown. And so the two sort of big ones to pay attention to, at least at this level, before we really zoom into like a specific neighborhood, is the purple outline with no fill. So those are potential districts that have already been determined eligible by the SHPO but are not listed. And then we have the sort of dark pink with the light pink fill. Those are districts that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then when you zoom in a little further, this is another, so although it's not a major tripping point, it is one to be aware of to make absolutely certain. So we had that sort of phrase that you need to be a contributing structure in a National Register district. You can see all of these yellow squares within that boundary, and those are identifying specific buildings or parcels. And if they're coded yellow, that means that they are a contributing structure to that district. The red squares are buildings that have been determined ineligible for listing on the National Register. So in this view, we're not seeing any red squares actually within that pink overlay, but you will see them in other districts aside from the Maplewood district that's shown here. And if you have the misfortune of being that red square, then that would sort of be something that would be worthwhile maybe calling SHPO and talking with them further about, because if you are that sort of determined ineligible, then you would also be ineligible for the tax credits. And then this is a view showing, so one of the other layers you can turn on in this system is to show the eligible census tracts that are qualifying or not qualifying. And so it produces this light orange overlay. And you can see the sort of difference between the two here, where there's an area there at the bottom left of the map that's just sort of showing the building outlines with no orange overlay. That is a census tract that is not qualifying, versus this sort of orange overlay section to the predominant right half of the map that is showing a qualifying census tract. Then we see within that these pink overlay, pink outline National Register districts. So it's a district within a qualifying census tract. And we have those little yellow squares, so they're a contributing property to one of those districts. So all of those sort of yellow squares we're seeing there are all potentially residential structures that would be eligible for the New York State Historic Homeowner Tax Credit.
So if you do not know or want to know how to operate the State Preservation Office's CRIS GIS database that we were just showing you screenshots of, don't worry. You can always reach out to me and I can look it up for you to see if you're in a historic district or if you're contributing property. But really, it's good to always get the information straight from the horse's mouth and just go straight to the State Historic Preservation Office. So the person you would want to reach out to, particularly if you're in that situation that Chris mentioned, where you can see you're in a district, but maybe you are not listed as contributing and therefore wouldn't be eligible for the tax credits. The person to reach out to would be the person at the SHPO who manages the National Register program for the counties that we've got listed here, and that's Virginia Bartos. And you can send her an email or give her a call and say, listen, I'm in a district. I want to know if I'm contributing or not contributing. You can use tax credits, or I'm not in a district. I want to know if my house could maybe be eligible to be individually listed like Chris's is. So if you have questions about whether you're eligible for the tax credit program, it's really good to get it straight from the horse's mouth and go straight to SHPO. All of their contact information is on their website, which is listed here at the bottom. And if for any reason you can't find it, you can always reach out to me at the Landmark Society and go to our website, landmarksociety.org. You can find my email address and phone number, or you can always just send an email to our general email, info@landmarksociety.org, and we can get you to where you need to be. So bottom line is, if you don't want to mess with the web application, Chris, just come and find a human being and we can help you out.
Okay, so the next couple slides will talk about qualified and unqualified rehabilitation expenses. So these are items that you would be able to submit the costs for and get the 20% back through the tax credit program. So this sort of lists a lot of these things are common areas that you would probably expect to have sort of major expenditures for repairing and maintaining your house. So everything from your roof to your windows and doors, certainly with any historic fabric of your building. So whether it be your old windows or doors, the masonry or the wood cladding on the outside, tax credits are not going to be there primarily to pay for replacing those elements that are sort of historic built fabric of your home. It's really meant to pay for and incentivize repair and restoration of those items. In rare cases, if you are able to provide sufficient documentation, SHPO may allow for tax credits for replacement of some of those historic materials. And then some of the big ticket items like roofs are sort of also joined with other big ticket items that aren't necessarily historic items, but are important to maintaining and keeping a historic property viable, which is your mechanical systems, so your HVAC, your plumbing, your large furnace, if you're rewiring the house, all of that is eligible, as well if you're getting into a more complicated or larger project, you hire a architect like me or an engineer. Those soft costs are also qualified expenses for the tax credit program.
A good rule of thumb is, if you can pick the building, imagine picking your house up and shaking it. Things that would fall out if you shook it generally don't qualify. So like, we'll see in another slide, but appliances don't qualify.
And then something I like to highlight also is that historic preservationists in general, as well as SHPO in their capacity of administering this tax credit program, are not opposed to and often are rather encouraging of sort of greening and encouraging sustainable improvements to our historic homes. So things that are a little more common, like putting in insulation, as well as window efficiency upgrades, like putting interior or exterior storms onto your house. Those are all things that are welcome, but then also things that maybe you wouldn't have thought would have qualified, do qualify. So they have had a handful of geothermal heating systems put in and qualify for the rehabilitation tax credit system. And then I personally have had solar panels installed in my property and gotten the 20% historic rehabilitation tax credit on them. Solar panels specifically are a little more, require a little more detailed discussion with SHPO, so there are some requirements as far as where they can be located on the property. The big sort of rule of thumb is they generally do not like to see the solar panels present on the primary or front facade of the house. So putting it on a roof slope that is right at the front of the house facing the street is generally a no-no. But beyond that, there's maybe a little more discussion, but they are relatively flexible and encouraging of doing that. And then unqualified rehabilitation expenses. So the cost to acquire the property, work on contributing structures. In an early iteration of the tax credits, you were able to get tax credits on repairs to garages, but that has since been removed as a qualifying expense. And then any site improvements, so driveways, landscaping, fencing, etc. Any new additions to your historic property, so giving tax credits on sort of new construction that is outside the envelope of the building, as well as, like Caitlin sort of mentioned, things that would fall out when you shake the house. So appliances, window treatments, things like that. And then if you're doing a lot of DIY, this might sort of come up. Any tools that you might buy in order to execute some of the work, the tools are not a qualifying expense.
So, and just to give an example, so tools are not a qualifying expense, but materials can be if you're DIYing things. So this came up when I was filling out my tax credit application for my house. I want to restore my historic wood windows. So let's say I want to buy, a heat gun or an infrared paint remover. Those are tools, so those don't qualify, even though they're, essential kind of tools for the job. But the materials for restoring those windows would qualify. So, for example, my windows need new ropes in order to operate, or weather stripping to be more weather tight. So those things are materials and would qualify. And yeah, sadly, even if you have a cute historic garage like this, it does not qualify for the tax credits. So all of the work that one does under the tax credit, the homeowners tax credit program, has to meet what's called the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. Chris and I will not bore you with what exactly those are. They are, you can read them. The state SHPO's website links to them. But they're a set of 10 general guidelines. And the general principle, like Chris has already said, is retaining historic features and materials, repairing rather than replacing things. And when something is too far gone to be repaired, to replace it with like materials, to replace in kind. So porches are, a good example of something that often needs repair, where details really matter. So this is just an example of a very typical early 20th century porch. Replacing it with something like this, or with, like a pressure treated decking material. You often see that, where you've got the square, unpainted, unstained deck spindles, that type of thing. You're not repairing what's there or replacing it in kind. So it does have to be somewhat in keeping, with the historic character of the house. And it's not that you have to restore your house to exactly what it looked like in 1910, but that you're generally repairing historic features, and we're not blowing out interior walls to create that open floor plan. And I'm going to mute myself because my dogs are barking.
Okay, so where do I start? So if I figured out that I'm in the qualifying census tract and a contributing structure, and I'm starting to think about maybe the work I'm going to do, where could I possibly sort of begin? I know for sure that this can be daunting for owners of historic homes. So a really good place to start, most folks generally will probably have a home inspection, which you received when you purchased the property. And a good sort of detailed home inspection will likely identify items of concern and items in need for repair. So this is a few excerpts from my own home inspection. I had a few issues with one of the chimneys on my house, had issues with water infiltration, and it also sort of bulging out of plumb. So that was sort of an item I knew sort of at the forefront at the beginning that was an issue that I wanted to address and wanted to prioritize depending on my budget, as well as a few issues surrounding my boiler that are pictured there. But home inspections are a really good place to start, especially if it's a good thorough one. With commercial or larger buildings, often they will have condition surveys or condition reports conducted by a architect or engineer. Occasionally homeowners can have that done, but generally I would say you can sort of start from your home inspection. But if it's out of date or you haven't had one recently and you want to at least begin to develop a list, if you haven't developed your own list, it's certainly worthwhile potentially reaching out to an architect or engineer to give you a sort of brief survey of what the existing conditions of your house are, maybe some items that you may have not noticed or may have not thought were as serious as they were. Okay, and then so when you have, you begin sort of developing a list of items that you want to complete, this is sort of my rough ordering of things that I would sort of see as priority and sort of considering, you know, what can wait and what cannot wait. So certainly number one, absolutely, is anything dealing with life safety or potential collapse of the structure. Generally, most homes, if you're going to secure a mortgage from it, are probably going to be pretty clear of any major issues like that. It is potential to maybe have that on a sort of ancillary piece of the house, like a front or rear porch that may have structural issues and would need stabilization to retain that piece of your home. Weather tightness is a big one. Any opportunity that water has to infiltrate your house, whether it's from roof leaks, ice dams, holes in the siding. If you have the sort of ground around your home is sort of built up too high and is in direct contact with any wood elements of your home, and that sort of allows a sort of very accelerated rate of deterioration. So certainly, yeah, always trying to avoid water filtration to your home is a big top priority. Any design deficiencies that might be causing ongoing damage to the house. So they didn't always build it right back then. There may be some issues that are even sort of just inherent in how your home was built, and maybe something that it's causing issues. Caitlin might touch on one of the problems that her house had that was a design deficiency that was causing issues for her. Active deterioration of any materials or finishes. So this sort of blends into the weather tightness, but certainly anything if you are sort of noticing sort of deterioration of paint finishes. I had a particular issue with paint finishes in the ceiling of my second floor that keyed me into some other issues that I had to deal with. The exterior envelope repairs in general, it's always best to really keep your exterior envelope in the sort of highest and best condition that you can, and sort of starting from top down and outside in as far as to keep your house in tip-top shape and to address the things that are going to be the bigger ticket items or things that might cause more deterioration in the future. And then mechanical system maintenance and replacement is a big one. Those are bigger ticket items, but things to certainly plan out over a long period of time and be cognizant of. And then last but not least, the things that maybe you want to do, but you don't need to do, are cosmetics and improvements to the home. But certainly if they sort of fall within some of those qualifying expenses, they definitely qualify for the tax credits. But I would always sort of emphasize, try to address the top 6 first before getting too concentrated on cosmetics. These are just some common maintenance issues that I often see both in my own house or with any sort of historic building. Site drainage is a really big one. You want to make sure that the water is sort of is traveling away from the house. You don't want to pool water or have water come towards the house. That's a big thing with sort of grading. If you have a lot of impermeable surfaces like asphalt on the property that might be retaining water or concentrating water against a certain portion of your house. Stormwater collection, your gutters, downspouts, and storm sewers, that's a real big one to make sure that you're properly collecting that water and getting it either into the storm sewer or away from the house. So you don't want sort of burst downspouts that might be putting an excess amount of water against the building. Windows and doors, certainly doing incremental maintenance on those really makes it far more manageable than if you get to a point where your windows and doors are in really, really poor shape and that need a lot more work than you may be able to handle DIYing. Insulation and weather stripping, repointing masonry is certainly a big one as our homes age, painting exterior wood surfaces, and then porches are always something that seem to constantly need attention. They're out there in all the seasons and surrounded by weather on 3 sides. So porches are often sort of get the brunt of the weathering of our homes if we have them. And then so these are examples of my own house. So examples of things that could wait and things that could not wait. And I had, interestingly, 2 things. And one thing was a little more cosmetic, although it did entail issues with the exterior envelope. So vinyl siding in general is not something that would be accepted as something you would get expenses to install. And vinyl siding on a historic building is problematic because of its ability to retain moisture as well as to conceal any potential other sources of deterioration. So two of the first things that I addressed, one was dealing with the vinyl siding, which we'll touch on in the next slide. And the second one was I did not have an insulated roof, and I had issues with pretty significant ice dams the first winter I stayed in the house. You can see the roof was here chiseling off almost a foot of ice that had built up. And then the water-soaked plaster walls on the interior of my home. So these were sort of two main things that I addressed right off the bat. We're dealing with the vinyl siding on the front of the home, as well as dealing with my water damming and insulation issues for my roof. And these are sort of in progress. So that sort of snaking coil going up into the attic was part of the installation of the insulation in the attic floor to help with the heat loss. And then there was also insulation installed in some of the lower roofs, especially the one over at the front door. Unfortunately, I had to drill holes in the ceiling and the interior to do that, but that was certainly key from seeing the major ice dam. That was a major source of heat loss in my home and therefore the buildup of ice dams. And then restoring the front facade was actually something in negotiation with SHPO to get my house listed on the National Register and to get to the tax credits. The negotiation settled on that the first project I needed to tackle, I needed to complete the first year, was restoring the front facade to remove the vinyl from the home in order to get it individually listed on the National Register. Because that's a much higher bar to pass. There are certainly lots of homes with vinyl siding that are contributing structures to districts, but in order to become an individually listed property, that's a much higher bar to pass, and therefore it sort of came down to that with this sort of modest home, there really needed to be sort of a show of good faith in order for me to get access to those tax credits.
So, on that slide where Chris showed some common maintenance issues, I have had most of those. So if you are unlucky enough to have a cross gable roof in our climate, then you will relate to my problems. So because I have a cross gable roof, all of the melting snow and water, and also my attic is not insulated. So all the heat, goes up from the second floor into the attic, causing the snow to melt. But then all of that melt is going straight to the four corners of my house. So as you can see, the gutters along the sides aren't really doing anything. They're kind of pointless because everything was draining to the four corners. So I would get these icicles. This one on the front corner would literally be like 5 or 6 feet off the ground after we had had a lot of snow. So that created some issues, including, this is a bedroom on the second floor of my house. This is one of the corners of the house, on the back of the house, where that melting ice and snow that was kind of glued, massive, glacier that was glued to the corner of my house. As that melts, that water gets up into the house. And so in the attic, in some of the beams and the structural members in the attic, you could see that they were actually waterlogged. But that water also caused damage to the plaster and caused much of the plaster to fail in one of the bedrooms. So that's an item that is on a to-do item that is on my tax credit application, which we'll be taking care of in the next, year or so, hopefully. So repairing that plaster, and we will be repairing the plaster rather than, say, ripping it out and replacing it with drywall. So one way, and this was work I've already done years ago before we had a historic district in place, but the one way that we dealt with that drainage, because as Chris said, getting the water away from your house and not letting it settle there is one of the most important things you can do. So the way we dealt with that is I hired Chris, actually, and his firm to design some kind of drainage solution. So we decided to cut off basically the corners of my roof, and what we were going to do was create big copper basins that could collect all of that rainwater and ice melt. Turned out there wasn't really enough structure to tie that big basin into, So what we ended up doing is creating basically big copper gutters to kind of fill that space. And then we have really large copper downspouts that can handle the massive amount of water that we get in that space. So again, that was fairly expensive work that we did before our historic district was in place in the Park Ave neighborhood. So, you know, those are sunk costs for me that I don't get tax credits for because the program is not retroactive. So another project that addresses some of our common maintenance issues is my rear porch. And this is something that we're applying for tax credits for. The porch, as you can see here, has just traditional K-style aluminum gutters. Those gutters aren't functioning properly, so they basically leak from the corners. And when it's raining or when the snow is melting, you can just see giant mud puddles right directly beneath the corners of the gutters. So what that has caused, all that ponding, has caused these brick piers that support the porch to gradually sink over time. And the one on the left-hand side is actually in worse condition. It's kind of hard to tell with the perspective on the center picture, but basically the pier has sunk one way into the ground. And you can see this one brick has actually shifted here, and it's actually shifted a lot worse since they took this picture. So one of our big projects is to basically prop up the porch and dig out the footers, re-pour concrete footers, and relay these same bricks, salvaging them as much as we possibly can. So the brick piers shifting, which has also caused a problem on what you see in the right-hand side picture, is that the bases of the columns are also starting to split because one side of the column is, is sinking into the ground while the other is not at the same rate. And we also, from general kind of wear and tear, the bases of the columns have experienced some rot, which has also attracted some insect infestation. So we won't be repairing this because there's so much rot and so much damage, but we will be replacing it in kind. So we'll be replacing it with a material that will be durable and that will replicate the historic appearance of that column base.
Okay, so do you do it yourself or do you hire it out? So there are different things to consider for both of those. Certainly I would caution if you're DIYing it, certainly only sort of pursue things that maybe you're comfortable with or have had at least sort of some lengthy previous experience with. So generally, I would not recommend a homeowner doing the roof. I would not recommend a homeowner installing their own furnace. But certainly doing paint work or an example from my own experience, if you're trying to restore your old kitchen cabinetry, which again is primarily just paint work, I was just doing a lot of labor of stripping and painting. That's certainly something you can try to tackle yourself. But something to keep in mind when you DIY, and Caitlin has already previously touched on this earlier on, is that when you are doing the work yourself, it's sort of considered donated labor, and you're not able to sort of bill or sort of invoice your labor. It's not something that you can get tax credits on, but you can get tax credits on the labor of someone else if you're paying or hiring a contractor to complete the work. But when you're hiring, certainly, the questions come up, how do I make sure that we're doing the work correctly? What are resources that I can sort of look to for some guidance? And also, I think I've sort of seen this come up in the chat. How do I budget for the work, or what are some ways of approaching the tax credit program? Which I think Caitlin and I will probably touch on. We sort of are maybe sort of falling into two different camps of how you do your tax credits for this program. So really excellent resources that are provided by our federal government dollars coming from the National Park Service. There are, I think, 47 and counting preservation briefs. So these are very in-depth sort of scholarly articles that are sort of written by the best of the best of their trade in the country, and are gone through a lengthy vetting process, but are touch on all sorts of elements of repairing and restoring historic structures, everything from windows to your masonry, different types of finishes, modern materials that you might see in a 1930s, 40s, or 50s house, and very archaic materials that you might see in a house from the sort of advent of our country. There are also a smaller number of preservation tech notes. Most of these get a little too out into the weeds for the homeowner, but there are a few sort of series that are helpful. There's a whole series on paints and finishes, and so the first one of that series is the one shown here, the preservation tech notes for exterior woodwork. That's a really great sort of resource to think about how you do correct preparation of your wood exterior in order to make sure that you have a really long-lasting paint job. All of these resources are available from the National Park Service for free. They're all in PDF form.
And even if you're not doing the work yourself, I really recommend that you look up these preservation briefs if you're thinking about having specific type of work done, or you have an ongoing problem. Because it'll give you some knowledge to talk to the contractors with, so that you can kind of check that they know what they're talking about, and make sure that they know that you know what you're talking about. So you can just Google National Park Service preservation briefs, and you can see these. They're a really, really great resource.
And then, of course, there's various other publications from private entities. So Old House Journal has been around, I think, since the late 1960s, early 1970s. It remains a really great resource for homeowners. Obviously, it depends on each issue what various repair element or item might be featured. But they continue to do a good job to this day of having sort of expert editors and contributors that put in some really nice how-tos into the magazine. Another great publication that is specifically targeted to be more approachable and understandable by homeowners is the Rehab Rochester publication. So this was written by one of our sort of titans of historic preservation in Rochester, Steve Jordan, when he was on staff of the Landmark Society. The Landmark Society, as well as the City of Rochester, have this publication available for free in PDF form on their website. And then there are also a series of books out there that focus on specific pieces of your historic building. And in Steve Jordan's later career, he developed a sort of national reputation and specialty in restoring wood windows. He continues to work as a craftsperson today, restoring people's windows throughout Rochester and beyond, but also sort of gave away all his secrets and compiled them into a book that was published, I think, about 2 years ago now, which is the Window Sash Bible. So you got all these resources, you've read up on them, you think you've got a pretty good understanding of some of the work that you want to complete. So who do you hire? There's sort of two great resources you could reach out to. You can ask an architect. Architects in general, by nature of our profession, we're working with contractors a lot on various construction projects throughout our region. And so we've got a lot of experience with those contractors and are familiar with the ones that we trust or may recommend for certain types of work. Also, the Landmark Society has a sort of massive internal compendium of craftspersons for all various types of trades and work to be done, as well as notes within their sort of internal database about recommendations and reviews from people that have had the work done. So the Landmark Society is also a really fantastic resource for that. And if you pass over those two, you can certainly also talk to a neighbor or a friend or a family member, someone that you trust who owns a historic building and has had work completed for them, and see who they recommend or who has done work on their home. And then this is certainly something I always like to remind people. Caitlin knows this firsthand, is that qualified contractors who are going to do this specialty work, they are not going to be the cheapest, and they're also not going to be available tomorrow to do the work. So be prepared to wait, but when the job is done, more likely than not, you're going to be really pleased with the work.
And yeah, I will just kind of reiterate what Chris just said, is that it is, so one of the reasons in our 5 to Revive list, we included the traditional preservation trades a few years ago. And the reason we did that is because there are a very limited number of folks. Most of them are men, few women, but most of them are men, who are approaching retirement age. With every specific trade, whether it's plaster repair, historic masonry, or window repair, stucco, what have you, there's maybe 2 or 3 guys at most who really specialize in that particular trade. So so they're in very high demand, and that's why it can be really hard to find someone to take on your job. And even if you get them to take on your job, it might be a year or more before they can get to it. So that's something to keep in mind, and just kind of go into it being, if you do want to use someone, if you really, it may be really necessary in order to do the job, quote unquote, right, to use someone who has the specialized knowledge. So if you do go in that direction, just go into it knowing that it may be a bit of a long process, and it may require some patience and persistence on your part. And if you know young people who, maybe going to a 4-year college isn't their thing, or they don't know what they want to do, encourage them to go into the traditional trades, because we definitely need more folks who have this expertise and knowledge. And that's something we're working with our partners around the state to provide some training opportunities to get more folks into these fields.
And then this is just sort of my little addition, additional thing. Even if you get a recommendation from an architect or from the Landmark Society, and especially if you get a sort of recommendation word of mouth from a family member or neighbor, trust but verify. It's always important that you ask for references and examples of their work. It's good to visit those projects in person, and if you can, talk to the owners and try to get a better understanding of how this contractor conducts themselves, and how pleased those owners are with the work. And then Caitlin touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the preservation briefs, but if you do some of the self-education and you're familiar with the sort of traditional methods that are recommended and outlined in those preservation briefs, you can sort of check and make sure and get a more comfortable feeling of whether or not this contractor is familiar with traditional trade work methods, and they're are capable of and aware of sort of the methods that are outlined in those preservation briefs. And then if you're not doing a really complicated project that might involve an architect or an engineer, if you are going to be getting prices on work, it's always best to do sort of do your utmost to write out what the scope of work is you want to have done and be as accurate as possible, so you make sure that you're not comparing apples to oranges, that each contractor is giving you a price for the exact same amount of work as you understand it and what you want completed. And then, of course, always get more than one quote or estimate for the work. Don't just take the first one that comes to you. And
just one thing regarding, if you read the preservation briefs, say on historic masonry, one of the things to be aware of is if a contractor comes to you and says they want to sandblast, your historic brick or stone wall, you'll know to run in the opposite direction. So just there are important little nuggets and things that can actually do more damage to your house that you don't want a contractor doing. It can create, if you have someone working on a material that they're really not an expert on, and they do something inappropriate, it can cause problems that you didn't already have. There we go.
Okay, and then so how do you budget for this work? So there's different ways you can approach this. So certainly you have to meet the minimum of $5,000 worth of work in order to submit a completed application. And it's something that I always advise any clients or friends is that with any historic building, generally there are going to be unknowns that you may encounter during the work. So to always sort of plan and budget for a 20% additional contingency just in case there's additional work that is discovered, especially if you're paying for the work to be completed and the contractor sort of uncovers more work than what they initially sort of estimated in the scope. And then for larger projects, certainly, try to plan out in advance. It doesn't hurt to get estimates and then budget and save for that project over a period of years. You don't need to wait to get estimates until the moment that you have all the cash in hand ready to go. But with the amount of work, so the approach that I've taken personally is that I've sort of aimed for right around that minimum of $5,000 worth of work. There's maybe one year I did 10,000, but instead of grouping everything I wanted to complete into one giant pot and then submitting that work after years of working on and completing it, I sort of broke it up into smaller pieces of work, whereas other homeowners, and I know Caitlin sort of going back and forth on this, whether she wants to sort of do a larger pot and then work towards it over a period of years, or break off smaller $5,000 chunks and make incremental sort of applying submissions year to year. You can do it either way. It's just more so what you're comfortable with and what you're able to budget for. And certainly, if you're really trying to be as sort of scrappy as possible with the money that you're sort of investing in the tax credits on, especially if your adjusted gross income is below $60,000 and you get the credit as a strict refund. So that means the money you get back could actually exceed what you paid in your initial taxes to the state of New York. Taking that refund and just rolling it right into your next year's budget if you're doing these small little $5,000 bites. Okay, so we're going to go kind of quickly go through just examples to show you the sort of part 1, part 2, and part 3s of the application. And I want to sort of stress that in general, this process is purposely designed to try to be more manageable. The commercial income producing tax credits are far more detailed and really essentially require you to hire professional help in order to complete them. Whereas these are meant to sort of be a little more manageable and don't necessarily require hiring an architectural historian to expend hours and hours of work of documentation and review, et cetera, to get the tax credits. But I think that's really a function of the scale, because a lot of the commercial tax credit projects that we see are often budgets of multi-millions of dollars, and we're just talking about $5,000 to $10,000. So we'll just page through quickly here. There's some just general information that you fill out as far as the address and the name of the property to sort of verify on SHPO's end that it is a contributing structure or an individually listed structure, your contact info so they can communicate with you throughout the process. There is a sort of checklist of the requirements, which we sort of went over, but this is sort of your, in a way, a written affidavit that you are a contributing structure, you are in this district. You're not sort of requesting these tax credits when you're not eligible for them, essentially. And then you have a really rough ballpark there at item D. What's your total estimated project cost? And then there's a series of things that you're required to enclose with your application, depending on the work that you're doing. So they want to see exterior photos of the house from all visible elevations on the exterior, photos of any areas that you're proposing to do work inside and out. And they want you to key the locations of those photographs to document everything before work begins. And then you'll see the following worksheets, sort of part of the part 2. You're going to describe the work that you're proposing, and the more detailed stuff like construction plans, specifications, that's if you're really getting something more complicated where you might submit something you get from an architect. So this is an example of one of mine. This is they have updated the form slightly so that you can put in a lettered key for your project instead of sort of just writing in the margins like I did. But essentially, you need to describe the work that you want to complete, a verbal description of what the existing conditions of that portion of your home are, and then what your change is that you're proposing, and then the estimated cost. You should just go through that matrix line by line for the various items that you've sort of identified that you either want to tackle on a really big project over a period of years, or a smaller one you're trying to break smaller pieces off and do it all in 1 year.
And you'll see if it's a relatively straightforward item, like replacing your water heater or replacing your roof, you don't need to go into extreme detail. You just have an existing water heater from whatever date, and I'm going to replace it with a new water heater. So it really is pretty user friendly and designed for the average homeowner to complete. And then, on the sort of following here, this is sort of a more detailed description that was part of their older form about the photographs and the drawings, and providing cut sheets or shop drawings for any more complicated or detailed items you might be including. So that's sort of already previously covered in the updated sort of first 2 pages that you saw for the part 1.
And then this is an example of some of the more detailed documentation that you might need if it's something that's a little more involved. So when you're doing sort of replacing in kind, so like for like I sort of pointed out with the water heater, I'm just having I submitted a photograph of the water heater. I'm going to replace it with another water heater. But one of the elements that I wanted to do was to restore the flower box or rebuild the flower box that had been on my front bay window. It does not exist now. So when I photograph the bay window, you just see shingles and window. And so this was sort of a drawing to convey, this is my design intent for what I'm hoping to accomplish. And then on the second page here is part of the solar panel installation. This is the sort of cut sheet for the solar panels, stipulating the various sort of parts and pieces of it and their visual appearance. So one of the things, if you're going to be going on a solar panel path, a really good thing to follow is to look at what precedents have been set locally already. So the Rochester Preservation Board has reviewed and approved a series of solar panel installations in the local preservation districts. So they're not necessarily tax credit projects, but they have been reviewed with a sort of preservation eye in mind. And so one of the things that I found that's sort of a fail-safe to keep in mind for your solar panels is generally in a historic structure, if you're installing solar panels, you're going to want to have panels that are pure black with black frames, and you shouldn't be able to see the individual cells on the panel itself. And then this is sort of just a sheet of photographs. So I've numbered them. I'm noting the direction that they're looking for the exterior elevations, and then I've got photographs of existing conditions of areas that I want to repair or improve, and they're keyed to that letter for the work items. You can see letter E, and there's a series of photos related to letter E that were kitchen related or lighting related improvements. And some more of the same. The bottom two photos there, for me, so I had the good benefit. So I sit on my house is located on a street where my front facade faces due south. So placing solar panels on my main home, it would have put them on the front elevation, which was not something that would have been approved by SHPO. But I have a detached garage that had a south-facing roof. So since the solar panels are part of the electrical system of the house, they qualify even though their physical location is placed on this out structure. So any of the work I actually did on the garage, aside from installing the panels, would not have qualified. And then not everyone has floor plans. I do. It may be a little easier for me for marking where my photos are, but you can sort of get the gem. You don't have to do something as anywhere detailed as some architectural plans like this. But if you have you can draw a diagram sort of showing the boxes of the various rooms in your house to get a general sense of the layout as well as the direction, and you're able to sort of mark those up, showing where the photographs are looking for each one of the key photographs there.
And again, I want to emphasize too, it's good to be in touch with the SHPO staff, with those two folks whose names I gave you at the beginning, Francis and Christina. Because if you have questions about this, well, do I need to key all of the photos, or, if it's something simple like my roof, do you, getting really detailed questions, be in touch with them and send your questions to them. Because it's certainly easier to address that stuff on the front end rather than to, just go ahead and throw your application together and hope that it's fine. They're happy to answer those questions for you.
Sorry, I'm responding to a question real quick. Okay, so your approval of your Part 2 as well as Part 2 amendment. So there is a Part 2 amendment form. If there arises that there's an item of work that you want to include for review that you forgot to include in the original Part 2, so that occurred for me for one item and during one of my years, and so that it's a very simple one-page form, essentially a miniaturized version of the Part 2 we went through. It's not meant to have a major list of new items. It's really, if you forgot one or two you want to add for review for that year's tax credits. You get a written letter stating that they've reviewed and have approved any of your proposed work that was submitted. You get a project number, which is that 17PR04560. So that project number allows you to check in on your progress with your approvals as well as review through the CRIS system. And now I think it's getting to the point where SHPO actually prefers you to submit, if you can, submit your forms digitally through the CRIS system. So having that project number is key, because that allows you to sort of put this little digital signature that allows it to file right away, and so SHPO knows what they're looking at when they receive your forms. These forms are from 2017, when really it was still primarily paper-based.
And I will say I did just submit my application 2 weeks ago, and you do still have to, they need an original signature, so you do still have to send in, snail mail a paper form.
Okay.
Let's see, all right.
Okay, so then you complete and document the work. Although you won't necessarily be submitting it with your Part 3, it's really important, especially for documentation when you get to taxes, and to have that sort of backup. Make sure that you're saving the estimates, and especially the final invoices from your contractors if you're hiring out work. If you're doing DIY, be sure to sort of save your receipts, or develop a system that you can easily track your expenditures for materials. And as just a reminder, your labor does not count, or do the tools that you buy count. It's the materials. And then for anything that may be a little more involved or more major, photograph the work in progress as well as when it's complete. And you'll see in the Part 3, it's really key, and it's required that you photograph the completed work anywhere that it's been done, and that you're seeking to get those tax credits. And then as a sort of general thing, if you're sort of like me and you're trying to get these tax credits like every year, and it's really key that you get that refund check, and you want to have all of your required documentation in time for filing your taxes in New York State, it's best to try and aim for that first week of November to not submit your Part 3 any later than that.
So just to recap, before we talk about the Part 3 application, so the Parts 1 and 2 go together, and Part 1 is just basically confirming that you are indeed in a historic district or individually National Register listed. And then Part 2 is the real meat of the application, where you see that gridded matrix that Chris showed you, where you list your proposed work and your current conditions and the estimated cost. When you submit your Part 2, the State Historic Preservation Office technically has 30 days to review it. Although if at least with my application, and I know others, they often respond much quicker. So I think it really kind of just depends on their workload. So yeah, once you get your Part 2 approved and then you do the work, Part 3 is where you send them that documentation saying, hey, I did what I said I was going to do in Part 2. And you do have to get that in. Chris's advice to aim for November 1st is good. But you definitely have to get it in by December 1st if you want to claim those credits on your tax return for that year.
Or I guess if you wanted to sort of maybe nuance it more, maybe you could take my November 1st recommendation and say, try to get all your work completed by November 1st, so that you then have time to compile your documentation and complete your Part 3 before December 1st. Okay, so this is just an example of the Part 3. So it's a very similar setup. It has that sort of matrix to infill. You're listing the final actual costs for the work completed, and then providing a short description of the completed work, and then again keying that to photos that will follow that document that completed work. So this was for some of the kitchen work that I did, as well as painting in the master bedroom. So it's sort of showing a progress shot of all the cabinets stripped. And then much to the entertainment of my friends, including Caitlin, I didn't get everything completed in my kitchen in time, but I did get most of it. And so I wasn't able to claim all of the credits I was hoping to do, but I certainly did a large majority of the work and was able to claim the credit for that. Had a little bit of stained glass work done, so just sort of showing I was able to capture the talented contractor who did the work for me, Matthew Smith, the Unified Vision Studios, installing the sort of fully restored stained glass panel in our front door, photos of the completed solar panel installation on our garage, and Some more, yeah, sorry, and we also, this is all coming back to me. We also did a little more stained glass work. So, and this is something I would add, while it is certainly good, and I strongly recommend always to make sure to sort of prioritize those bigger, more important items. These little stained glass items were items that were affordable and little pieces that I could sort of add in that were easily attainable and were things that were in need of repair, but are falling more under that sort of cosmetic end of things. So don't like sort of just rule them outright, but I would say don't solely focus on the cosmetic things and miss major things that you really should be concentrating on budgeting for.
Yeah, in particular, I always tell people, don't repair your plaster walls if you still have, water infiltration issues. If you've got ice dams that are still active or leaks in your roof, there's no sense in painting or repairing plaster if you still have those problems going on. So oftentimes, folks get excited about the thing that's pretty and sexy, but you want to make sure you're addressing kind of the root issues before you do the cosmetic stuff.
Right, and these are sort of reproductions of photo keys that we're seeing here. But when you submit, whether you do it through Chris or if you do it through the mail, you're going to actually be uploading the full-size digital image, and that digital image you'll have the file name will be keyed to your figure name. So you're not just going to be printing out 8.5 by 11s and sending them to Shippo. Shippo wants to have those high-def photos so they can verify the appropriateness of the work, and they're not squinting at perhaps a really poorly printed out photo key. So the photo keys are really meant there so you can have these longer captions and to help Shippo navigate the larger digital files that they'll be receiving either on a CD if you're sending through the mail or through Chris, which you would have submitted digitally. And then again, very similar, use that sort of diagrammatic floor plan, and then you're indicating location and direction of the photographs. And then your final approval, and then submitting that for your taxes. Sort of mentioned here, your credit can be carried forward until you use it. So that's the sort of approach that I mentioned that Caitlin might be considering, where you're doing a much larger portion of work and you're incrementally documenting it as you're going through it and then submitting it all at once. Or if you, if your household income is not below $60,000, your credit actually rolls over into the next year, so that you end up having to sort of fill out your New York State tax form twice to claim the full value of your credit if it's not just a straight refund check if you're below the AGI of $60,000. And then just a disclaimer, we're not providing tax advice. We're not CPAs. This is just sort of anecdotal experience.
And just to give you an example, let's say you spend $20,000 on a new roof. So 20% of that cost is $4,000. So you've earned $4,000 in tax credits. Well, let's say you don't have that much tax liability. Let's say you only have $1,000 in tax liability. Well, then you can claim those $1,000 worth of tax credits. And then if your household AGI is over 60,000, you can apply, and every year you only have $1,000 of tax liability, you can apply it $1,000 at a time each year. So it's a really flexible program. You're not going to get, you're not going to lose out on your credits as long as you follow the rules.
Okay, so then here's an example of so very similar to the Part 2 response letter. You get this official letter, it has the project number listed, and then you have this sort of official signature, and then they note to make sure to attach this certification letter. The letter also certifies the exact amount of the work. And then you're going to be filling out your New York State IT 237 form. So it, like the application forms, everything's inherently trying to be as sort of simple and straightforward as it can be. So the IT 237 is a single side of paper. It's not a very complicated New York State tax form. And then you sort of just work through the various lines, and in general, it's very sort of straightforward as far as calculating your credit and then submitting that as part of your taxes. And then just for fun, who doesn't like a good before and after? So that's what my kitchen looked like when I bought the house. A little on the scary side, but there was potential. And then this is the photo of the kitchen, I think about 2 weeks ago. So I have finally completed the full restoration of the cabinetry. I've yet to do $5,000 worth of work since my last application, so I'll be holding on until I get there, and then we'll include the sort of additional pieces of material that were used for doing the final finishing on all the doors. And appliances don't count. That's something to add. Certainly you've seen, I personally love vintage appliances. I think they're great. They're beautiful and wonderful. I love them, but I'm never going to get tax credits on those appliances, regardless of how nice they are.
And the other thing to note is, let's say you have a kitchen. So Chris has a time capsule kitchen, right? It's the historic kitchen, probably close to how it was originally built. But if you have a kitchen, say, that was updated in the 1980s, 1990s, even 2000s, and you want to update it, put your own spin on it, you can get credits for that, and you don't need to restore it back to, a 1915 kitchen.
Right.
You can put modern cabinetry and countertops in there, and you can get credits for the cabinetry and the countertops, but of course, like Chris said, not for the appliances.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, as an example, if you buy a house like mine that maybe has one of these sort of time capsule spaces, that runs into that same that sort of catch that we talked about, that you're often, unless you can really plead a sort of hardship case to ship, but you're not going to be getting tax credits for removing historic built fabric. So I would have not been able, or would have had an exceedingly hard time to try and get tax credits if I wanted to put new kitchen cabinets in place of the originals here. And then the exterior, again, not quite the day I bought it, but within the first couple months. And then that's the sort of front facade restored. I still have 3 sides to go, but the vinyl is at least gone in a way on the front. And I think there's maybe a follow-up photo that shows it from a different angle more recently, within the last month or 2.
And you'll note Chris has done a lot of landscaping work, and it looks beautiful where it was kind of bare beforehand when he bought it.
Right.
But again, this landscaping work does not qualify for the tax credits.
Right, and if you squint, you can see so on a newer piece of work that was part of my latest application was finally addressing my chimneys. And so this is one of the ones that are visible. You can see some of the new mortar that's still shining a little bright in this photo, and then the new concrete top and the rain screen at the very top of the chimney. So all of that work qualified. That's a sort of repair and restore type work. So
we're just about to finish up. So I do want to reiterate, like Chris and I said many times, the tax credit application for homeowners really is designed to be completed by the average homeowner. I have filled it out myself, and it really was quite easy. Everyone I know who has used the program has been really happy with it and really pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to navigate. So definitely, you can do it if you want to. However, if you don't want to be bothered with it, Landmark Society, we have a new program that we're offering where you can hire us to prepare your homeowner's tax credit application. And we have a pricing structure based kind of on how many work items you have. If it's just one item like doing your roof, then it's a lower price structure. And if you happen to be in a City of Rochester Preservation District, not a National Register District, or if you happen to be in an area that is both a City Preservation District and a National Register District, I should say, like, for example, the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood, or parts of Cornhill, or parts of East Avenue, we can also handle the process of getting a certificate of appropriateness from the City of Rochester Preservation Board if you're doing exterior work that does trigger that kind of review. So we will have all the information up on our website shortly at the URL that you see here at the bottom. It's not up there currently because we're just launching it, but we will have that information up there soon. And then we're also really pleased through the support of Esther Krakauer, our sponsor tonight, we are also able to launch a really exciting scholarship program, which I will let my colleague Larry Francer talk about.
Well, it's pretty straightforward what Caitlin has put in this the slide here. You have to be in a National Register Historic District, which you would have to be for tax credits anyway. And it's available for homeowners with financial needs, single income households of 50,000 or under, dual income households or not of 90,000 or under. And I already got one question about having somebody prepare it for you. And I do know that as much as Chris and Caitlin are telling us that it's user friendly, which I'm sure it is. If you're overwhelmed by all of it, you know, the Landmark Society could do it for you, or the Landmark Society could do it for you under the scholarship program. And we just want to say that even if you don't feel you would need the scholarship program, but you know some possibly, you know, elderly neighbors that may not be able to deal with this application, or a family, a hardworking family that just wouldn't have the time to do it, please send them our way, and we will have that application soon. And before we lose too many people, I do want to just thank Caitlin and Chris for such a wonderful job that they've done. You can either go to your little reactions and do the hand clapping, or we all can clap like this, but they've done a wonderful job. So I do want to thank both of them. And of course, we want to thank Esther as well, because tonight's program wouldn't be available without her support. And we're very, very excited about the scholarships.
So if you do have any questions, we are more than happy to spend a few minutes answering them. And we'll have one other thing. If you've got, you know, a large house with lots of complicated issues that you can't really get to the bottom of, you know, like Chris said, you do have the option of hiring an architect. You know, of course, that ups your budget, but it may, in the long run, save you money, because when you're working with an architect, they will take a holistic look at all of your old house issues and propose solutions that really address the problems. And they can also handle dealing with contractors if you don't want to be bothered with that too. So that's Chris's job to deal with the contractors. So,
and I want to ask one question that I received toward the end. And it was, does SHPO accept the application uploaded to Chris with a paper application to follow with original signature?
I mean, what I did was, you know, I emailed a PDF of my application to Christina. You can fill it all out on your computer, and you know, type into it and save it as a PDF and email it off to them, so that they have it. But yeah, you do have to email, or at least at this point, you do have to mail that paper application as well. With your original signature. And also there is an application fee of $25 that goes with your Part 2 application.
I was gonna say, in my experience, the one time when I had to do the Part 2, amendment, I was able to get a verbal approval from SHPO for that specific thing, because I was sort of running up against time. So generally, I've found, especially for the person in SHPO that we would be working with in our region, Christina Bagbolgi. Christina is fantastic. I can't say enough about her. She's always been very helpful throughout the whole process and super, super responsive. So people at SHPO are, in general, very supportive, very excited about this program. It's generally very underutilized, so they do their best to sort of go out of their way to make it a good experience.
And I know Holly Petzos had her hand raised, so Holly, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question if you'd like. Are you there, Holly?
Or if anyone has any questions, we do have a question in the chat box here. Can you please clarify how one would meet the 5% exterior requirement for some, let's say you had an electrical or plumbing project? Oh, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that, John. So let's say, I know I've got to do some electrical work. That's obviously going to be interior, or I need to replace my furnace or my boiler. That's interior work. So you have to be spending a minimum of $5,000. Well, let's say your interior electrical project costs $5,000. So you've met that threshold. Then you need to spend 5% of your total project cost on the exterior. So just find something on the outside of your house that needs repair. That with old houses, that's generally not hard to do. So maybe your porch needs to be paint. Porches take a beating. So, I know I'm painting my porch floor like every couple of years. So, or maybe you have some rotten siding or a rotten piece of your porch that you need repaired. You just find, usually you can find something on the exterior, or, restore a window, that type of thing. So you just that's why you kind of want to think holistically about this before you dive into a project, and kind of plan out, okay, what do I need to do on the outside? What do I need to do on the inside? What are the cost estimates? And how can I, put all of these things into an application and get the work done? Don't just think about what I want to do this year. Think about maybe what you want to do over the next 5 or 10 years to help you get to that 5% and $5,000 threshold. Are front steps, walkways next to the house included?
Steps, yes. Walkways, you probably have to ask SHPO, but I wouldn't think that walkways would count.
Yeah, walkways are probably those are going to be a landscaping, driveway, sidewalk kind of thing that does not qualify. The other question we have is about windows. Do replacement windows qualify, or do you have to be restoring your windows? So oftentimes folks will have windows that have already been replaced once, and those were a poor replacement. So in that case, it's no issue replacing a replacement window. If you do have your historic windows, SHPO is going to prefer that you retain them, but it really depends on what you're proposing to replace them with. And certainly we would encourage you to consider repairing your existing windows. They're kind of intended to be repaired, and they just need some maintenance. If you didn't give your car an oil change for a few years, it would probably be struggling too. But they are just definitely meant to be repaired, and it's it's something you can even DIY if you don't want to hire it out. And it generally is a better long-term, more sustainable investment to repair your historic windows. Any other questions that anybody wants to pop into the chat box or unmute yourself and yell out? We can take a few more, or we can call it quits.
Hi, I'm actually working on getting my house approved through the CRIS, new, what is it called? Getting a new National Register application, and I'm actually working on it right now. Would a garage be considered an outbuilding, or are these kind of separate structures?
Yeah, unfortunately, garages and shed, anything that's not the main primary building, unfortunately, doesn't qualify.
Okay, well, I was just asking a question about some of the outbuildings or any landscape features, so I just wanted some clarity. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, garage can be considered an outbuilding generally, yeah.
So we got a question kind of ancillary to that carport question mark. So essentially, if it's attached, yes. So if you have a carport or a portico share that is part of and physically connects to the house, then it's going to qualify, and that would be the same for the garage. So if you have an attached garage, that is part of the primary structure on the historic property. But if you're like me, you have a detached garage to the back of the property, you're out of luck.
Or you could have no garage like me. All right, well, thank you all for participating. If you have any questions, my email address is on the screen, or you can just go to Landmark Society's website. Definitely reach out if things occur to you, tomorrow or the next day. Definitely reach out with any questions. We did record this, so we will be uploading it to YouTube, and we'll send out a link on our social media and to folks who registered tonight. So if you know anyone who missed it, we will get that up. And I want to thank you all again for attending, and thank our sponsor, Esther Krakauer. So everyone, have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Esther.